The heavy suitcase slammed against my ankle as I struggled to drag it across the wooden porch steps. The front door was ajar, as if someone had just rushed out. I stepped inside, cinnamon and pine mingled in the air, crashing into my memory like a wave. Old Christmas mornings, Mom laughing in the kitchen, Dad's voice drifting from that old AM radio. Except now, the house was too quiet, too orderly, like someone had rearranged everything under a new logic, one that didn't belong to my mother, who never imagined coming back to Greenville, South Carolina this way. After nearly a year working as a technical advisor with the Joint Forces in Poland, I thought the hardest part would be the distance between me and my wife, Julia. But 3 days after landing, I found the brown folder hidden in my father's old desk drawer and realized the real damage was only beginning. The first page was a copy of a revised will, notarized, dated mid-June, about 4 months after I left the U.S. I flipped through each sheet, my heart pounding like a war drum. My mother, Loretta, had been demoted from primary trustee to secondary beneficiary, and in her place, Julia, the woman I'd loved for 8 years, was clearly listed as the sole controller of all assets in the interest of the family. Family? I stared at the line in blue ink, feeling like someone had driven a fist straight into my chest. This house, the nearly 16 acres of land behind it, the apple orchard, the creek that wound through pine woods, it all belonged to my grandparents before my father. Before he died from a stroke, he told me more than once, protect the land, protect the name. Now, it was all transferred. Not to me, not to my mother, to Julia. "You're home?" Her voice floated from the back door frame. Light as a feather, yet every syllable clinched something deep inside me. Julia leaned against the door, holding a glass of red wine. Her dark hair was tied back, the ruby earrings I sent her from Romania catching the kitchen light. I closed the folder and slid it into the drawer. "Just looking through some things." "I've cleaned everything up," she said as she stepped inside. "Your mom's finances were a mess. I had to step in. Property taxes, monthly bills. It could have turned into a disaster." I said nothing. "The will needed updating, Elias," she went on, calm and steady like she was finalizing wedding catering. "Your mom fully agreed. I just helped formalize what had already been discussed." I turned toward the window, watching the willows droop outside like faded shadows. My mother, now 84, had started to forget things on our video calls, mixing up days, asking twice about the same birthdays. At first, I chalked it up to age. I wasn't so sure anymore. "You're awfully quiet." Julia tilted her head, lips curling into a subtle smile. I forced a nod. "Thanks for handling things. I just need a few days to adjust." She smiled again, like someone who had just won a game without needing to move a piece. That night, after she went upstairs, I sat in my father's old wooden chair on the back porch. Insects buzzed in the humid summer air. Between the branches, shadows drifted and danced. I no longer knew if I was sitting in the home I grew up in or on the stage of a well-rehearsed play. One thing was clear. Something deeply wrong was unfolding inside this house I once called home. And the person I'd trusted most, the one I once believed was my safe return, was pulling strings behind the curtain. I met Julia in Charleston at a cybersecurity seminar for transitioning military officers. She wasn't a speaker or a tech lead like I'd assumed. She was a representative for an up-and-coming investment firm. Confident, sharp, and the way she spoke made it feel like she already knew your answers before you did. There was something about her eyes that made you think she genuinely cared, like she really wanted to know whether you drank your coffee black or with cream. We married after 8 months of dating. My mother was cautious, as she was with anything new, but Julia had a way of disarming people. After just a few weekend visits, she'd won over Loretta, helping her pick new living room furniture, remembering every food preference. I can still see her carefully wrapping up Mom's banana bread to post on social media, captioned, "Family isn't just blood, it's flavor tied to the heart." When my dad passed away, Julia held my hand in the funeral home as my knees gave out. He'd been a National Guard colonel, disciplined to the syllable. From the beginning, he didn't trust Julia, said she was too smooth, too polished. I dismissed it. Even during his final 6 months in bed, Julia coordinated medications, insurance files, and whispered calming words for me when I couldn't hold it together. Right before his final breath, he gave me a dark brown leather envelope, sealed. "This land is a symbol," he said, "not because of its value, but because of its roots. Don't let anyone touch it unless they understand that." I didn't open it then. Some things feel eternal until they're not. After the funeral, Julia brought it up again, something she'd floated before. "We should really think about building here, Elias. That apartment in town isn't working anymore. You're gone a lot, and I can't keep bouncing between both places. Your mom's backyard is the perfect spot." I turned her down. Again. That land was where my father built his workshop, where I learned to change oil on an old pickup when I was 16. Julia didn't argue, just gave a faint shrug, but I saw something shift in her eyes, like her blueprint had just hit an unexpected wall. She never brought it up again, but from that moment on, little things began to change. Each time I deployed, Julia handled Mom's medication box, her doctor appointments, her pension transfers. She became so involved I had no reason to question it. When I asked if Mom was doing all right, she'd smile. "You've got a rare gem for a daughter-in-law. I take care of it all." Back then, I thought taking care of it all was a blessing. I didn't realize it meant giving up control altogether. While stationed in Warsaw last year, Julia called twice a week. Always started with, "Are you safe?" and ended with, "Everything's fine at home." I trusted that rhythm like sunrise. But Mom, she'd confuse simple facts during our video chats. I chalked it up to aging. Looking back, maybe she couldn't tell the difference between kindness and a hand quietly sweeping the floor out from under her. I remember one night 2 years ago, Julia asked me, "Have you ever thought about what we'd do with the land after your mom's gone?" I shook my head. She smiled. One of those smiles that felt like a joke, but wasn't. Now, with those cold documents in the drawer, I realized it hadn't started when I came home. The pieces were laid long ago, through thoughtful suggestions and helpful acts that slowly shifted everything out of place. I'm no longer sure if I ever truly knew the woman who slept beside me for 8 years. But one truth has become undeniable. She never intended to remain just a daughter-in-law in this family. Loretta was fiddling with the thermostat the next morning when I entered the living room. In her hand was a bill, mixed with unopened mail and advertisements. When I stepped forward to help, she looked up, with a flicker of confusion and relief, like she had just remembered her son had finally come home. "Are you hungry, Elias? I think I had breakfast, but now I can't remember if I did or not." I nodded and sat beside her. "It's okay, Mom. I just wanted to talk a little." On the table was a small notebook, the kind used to track medications. I flipped through a few pages. My mother's shaky handwriting was mixed with Julia's neat, precise script. There were medication lists, dosing times, notes like, "Took Mom to get her blood sugar checked, Julia." "Scheduled follow-up appointment, Julia." "When did you start letting Julia write everything down?" I asked gently. She blinked, glancing at her hands. "I don't remember." She said it was easier to keep track that way. "She's been a good daughter-in-law, Elias. You were gone and she handled everything. Even the banking?" She hesitated. "She helped me pay the house bills, property taxes. All the paperwork is so confusing I can't make sense of it. There were times she brought papers for me to sign, said it was just to keep things safe while you were away." "What kind of papers?" She shook her head, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I can't remember clearly. She explained them very thoroughly, but my mind's not the same anymore, son. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't." A chill ran down my spine. "Take your time, Mom. Do you still have any of the documents Julia asked you to sign?" He probably took them all back to her room. Said she'd keep them safe so nothing would get lost. I pressed my lips together. What weighed on my chest wasn't just confusion anymore. It was something heavier, like a concrete slab. It wasn't Julia helping with a few tasks. It was her quietly taking over the parts my mother no longer had the capacity to understand. That afternoon, I sat in the garage with Max, curled under my feet, pretending to clean old fishing rods, just to avoid going inside too soon. Every time I pictured facing Julia, my breath caught in my throat. Not out of fear, out of fury. anger at myself for not noticing the signs that now seemed glaringly obvious. While I was overseas, I used to wonder why my mom had stopped sending emails. Julia said she struggled with the computer, so she printed out a few photos I'd sent and delivered them by hand. I thought it was a sweet gesture. Now I saw it differently. The carefully chosen photos, the emails that never reached her, the video calls delayed due to spotty connection. They were part of a polished layer hiding complete control. The next morning, I took Mom to lunch at Old Mill Cafe, the little place Dad used to bring us on holidays. In that familiar space, surrounded by the smell of toasted bread and the soft clinking of silverware, I brought up old memories, trying to ground her in something comforting. I remember Dad always ordered the fried chicken. You stuck to that vinaigrette salad. She smiled, then let out a long sigh. Those lunches stopped after he passed. Julia's always busy. You were away. Once the food arrived, I asked quietly, "Do you remember anything about updating the will?" She set her fork down, her eyes drifting. "Updating what?" "There's a document naming Julia as the trustee. Did you ever sign something like that?" I paused. "I think she once said I needed to sign a few things to make financial stuff easier while you were gone. I didn't think much of it. My eyesight's not great. The print was small." She read it out loud. "I assumed it was just bank forms." I gently squeezed her hand. "It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong." She looked at me, her lips trembling. "Are you mad at me?" I shook my head. "You can only be mad at someone who knows what they're doing. You were taken advantage of." On the drive home, I called Derek Morgan, a friend from the unit who now practiced civil law in Columbia. I explained how my mother didn't remember signing anything, and how she'd grown increasingly dependent on Julia. He replied with only one sentence: "Don't confront her yet. If she's hiding something, silence is your advantage." That night, Julia suggested we go out to clear our heads now that you're finally home again. She wore a red dress, her makeup softer than usual, and her smile brighter. We sat across from each other at a lakeside restaurant. I sipped water while my thoughts spun around everything Mom had said. Julia chatted the whole time about house projects, work, fall plans. When she brought up starting a forever home on the family land, I stared directly into her eyes. No anger, no suspicion, only silence, calculation. Because maybe what I needed wasn't confrontation, but proof that she had been playing this game long before I ever sat at the board. I'm not the paranoid type. 12 years in technical operations for the military taught me how to separate a vague hunch from a concrete lead. But this time, every detail pointed in one direction. After dinner, I slipped away to my dad's old study. The deep brown cabinet still stood in the corner, one handle worn smooth. I meant to look for old photographs. Instead, I found a white envelope, labeled in rushed handwriting. Statements, Jan-June. Private. It wasn't Dad's handwriting. It wasn't Mom's either. Inside were 6 printed bank statements, hastily stapled and out of order. The account header jumped out at me. Loretta M. Whitley and Julia D. Whitley, joint account. I froze. Mom had never mentioned any shared account. I held the pages under the lamp. Cash withdrawals every other week, ranging from $4,500 to $12,000. Signed by Loretta M. Whitley. The signature was shaky, unsure. My eyes locked on the March statement. $78,350 withdrawn in staggered amounts over fewer than 60 days. Somehow, Julia had opened a joint account with my mother and used it like her personal wallet. I needed more. Early the next morning, I took Mom for an eye appointment and swung by Community First Bank, where she'd held an account since her days at the bookstore. I asked the teller if she could pull up any accounts under Loretta Whitley. A blonde woman behind the desk checked the screen, then looked at me cautiously. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't share account details without authorized power of attorney." I slid over my military ID. "I am investigating potential financial exploitation of a senior. My mother has memory issues. Her joint account holder might be taking advantage of her." She paused, then lowered her voice. "I can't print anything, but I can let you view the screen for 5 minutes. We'll pretend you're verifying a deposit." She tilted the monitor. 3 accounts popped up. The first was Mom's original, virtually inactive. The other two were jointly owned with Julia. Each held less than $12,000. But what sent a chill down my back was the third, a linked investment account, nearly emptied. I asked who had set them up. The teller said Julia handled all the paperwork, claiming it was to support an elderly relative with memory issues. No one requested a medical assessment. Everything was approved with Mom's trembling signature. On the drive home, Mom dozed in the passenger seat. I stared at my hands on the wheel, hands that had weathered years in harsh environments, now useless in the very house I'd grown up in. That night, I didn't go to our bedroom. I claimed exhaustion and slept on the couch. Julia didn't question it. She just reminded me to take Mom to the pharmacy in the morning. Once she was upstairs, I opened my laptop and logged into Mom's old email. Her password was still July 1, 981. Buried in her inbox was a string of messages from Cornerstone Trust Services, the firm Dad used to set up our family's asset protection plan. One email subject line read, "Change of trustee approval, finalized." Attached was a PDF listing Julia as the new trustee, replacing my mother. Control of every asset, including the deed, now belonged to her. I couldn't sit still anymore. I called Derek Morgan immediately. There are 3 new accounts. 2 are jointly owned. One investment account has been nearly emptied. All the transactions carry my mother's signature. I have the statements. Derek exhaled heavily over the phone. Don't confront her directly. I'll connect you with an elder law firm in Greenville. We need to get Loretta in for a cognitive assessment immediately and file for a temporary asset protection order. I asked, if my mom signed while her memory was compromised, can it be invalidated? If we have solid medical evidence. It depends on the signing date and the health records from that time. I nodded, eyes still fixed on a photo of my father smiling brightly beside the old grapevine arbor. In the picture, he had his arm around Mom, his eyes full of conviction. I closed the laptop, stood up, and climbed the stairs quietly. Each step carried a question I couldn't yet answer. But one thing was certain. Julia's game was no longer about money. She was trying to erase the traces of an entire legacy. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I sat across from attorney Henry Alden, a man in his early 60s with neatly combed silver hair and a slow, firm voice. Behind him, plaques from the South Carolina Bar Association lined the wall, along with black and white photos of former high-profitable clients whose names I didn't add. I need you to review this revised will carefully, I said, placing the folder in front of him, and tell me if anything here is legally questionable. Henry put on his glasses, opened the file, and flipped through the pages as if reading someone's execution order. It was notarized in Spartanburg, he said after a few minutes, tapping the last page. The notary is Ruth Ann Gilbert. Which firm does she work for? I had already checked the night before. She used to be with Morningside Legal Group, but recently she moved to a smaller office called Bickham and Rowe. That office is run by Hannah Rowe, Julia's college friend. Henry looked up. A personal connection? They were roommates in the dorms. I found a graduation photo of them together from Emory Law. He nodded slowly, thinking, if the notary and the beneficiary had a close personal relationship, that's a conflict of interest, especially if the signer showed signs of cognitive decline. We'll need to prove both. I sat up straighter. I've scheduled a neurology appointment for Wednesday. I'm taking my mom in. If there's a clear diagnosis of impaired memory at the time of signing, is that enough to request invalidation? If the doctor concludes that her current condition began before the signing, there's a case, but we'll need solid medical records. I clasped my hands. I'll take care of the rest. 3 days later, I brought Mom to the Geriatric Assessment Center in Greenville. Dr. Rachel Monroe, a sharp middle-aged woman with cropped brown hair and eyes that saw through every expression, conducted the evaluation herself. For over an hour, she asked Mom about dates, asked her to repeat sequences, and remember 3 object names. My mother tried, but the confusion in her eyes was unmistakable. At the end, Dr. Monroe invited me in privately and placed a medical summary on the desk. Diagnosis: mild cognitive impairment, early stage, likely began developing 12 to 18 months ago. I didn't speak. Has anyone raised concerns about this before? Yes. Julia, She said Mom was forgetting things but never took her for formal testing. Monroe was silent for a few seconds. Who currently manages her assets? Julia, I answered, keeping my voice even. She used to room with the notary who handled the revised will. The doctor exhaled. I'll include the diagnosis in the record, along with my professional opinion that she may not have had the cognitive ability to legally understand complex documents at the time of signing. I thanked her, then drove Mom home in silence. She dozed off in the passenger seat, still clutching her worn leather purse like an unbreakable habit. That evening, I traced the notary trail to Bickham and Rowe's office just before closing. Ruth Ann Gilbert was getting ready to leave, but when she heard my name, she flinched, clearly recognizing it. I'm here to ask about the notarization of documents between my mother and my wife. She avoided eye contact. Yes, I remember that. Everything followed procedure. Was Loretta present at your office that day? Julia said your mother wasn't well enough to travel. She brought the paperwork and claimed your mom had approved it. She only said so. No video? No signature in person? No, I trusted Julia. I let out a dry laugh. Were you aware that my mother has memory loss? Her face paled. I wasn't informed. And you were close friends with Julia in college. She looked up, defensive. I don't discuss personal relationships in my professional role. Good. My attorney can bring it up during the hearing. I turned and left without another word. Outside the building, I called Henry Alden. I have a medical diagnosis. I have the notary admitting she never saw the signer. I have proof of a personal connection between the two. Henry replied with one sentence. That's enough to proceed. I'll draft the motion to invalidate the amendment. I hung up, stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching traffic crawl past in the amber glow of dusk. It felt like setting a dislocated bone back into place. 3 days after the visit with Gilbert, a manila envelope showed up in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a printed legal consultation form titled Asset Division in Military Marriages, November of last year. Signed, Julia Donovan. I sat frozen on the porch step, the document resting in my hands. The law firm listed was Franklin and Welch in Columbia. Not her employer, not affiliated with our family. The form was submitted less than 3 weeks after I'd landed in Poland for my extended deployment. Everything snapped into focus. Julia wasn't just managing assets. She was consolidating everything my father had left into a single package, under her name. And if she could, she'd vanish with all of it in her hands. That night, I sat in the study, reviewing credit card transactions from the bank my mother had used for years. A series of charges popped up, many in the Forest Acres area, nearly a 2-hour drive from Greenville. One entry stood out, a $4,000 deposit to Silver Glen Assisted Living, with the contact name listed as J. Donovan. He called the facility pretending to be a grandson, confirming information for his grandmother. The front desk clerk said the file was active and in the final stages of processing. The file stated Loretta M. Whitley, 84 years old, cognitive status, mild impairment. Projected move-in date, the 15th of next month. I hung up, my entire body cold. Everything had been arranged, carefully, methodically, likely for months. That weekend, Derek Morgan called, his voice low and urgent. Leas, I just got a copy of a lease agreement in Louisville under the name Julia Donovan, signed 7 months ago. Louisville? Yeah, 2-bedroom, fully furnished, no company affiliation, no authorized users besides her. Why there? Derek paused. I hired someone to check it out. Last week she went there twice, alone. No calls, no files. Looks like a ready-made fallback spot. I gripped the phone, a tight pressure building in my chest. Julia had once told me how lonely she felt every time I was deployed. Apparently, she had built an entire private world, so she'd never be alone again. That evening, Julia came home with a stack of documents saying they were tax papers that needed my signature ASAP. I opened the top page. Bold letters read, Supplemental Financial Power of Attorney. What is this? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Just a formality, so I can handle joint assets if something happens. You're away so often, remember? I didn't sign. Instead, I asked, "Have you considered placing Mom in assisted living?" Julia looked up, surprised by the directness. She frowned. "Yes. She needs professional care, Elias. I found the best place, not for me, but for her." "Did you already put down a deposit?" A brief silence. "Just to hold a spot. I didn't use our money." "You used your legal name?" Her face stiffened slowly. "Don't start digging into me, Elias." I smiled, though my jaw was beginning to clench. "You signed a lease for an apartment in Louisville back in January, under your maiden name. It's not in any of our tax or property records. Why hide it?" Julia didn't answer. She just looked at me, unmoving. Then she turned, took a sip of water from the kitchen counter, delaying the conversation by seconds. "I didn't do anything wrong," she finally said. "I'm just protecting myself. If everything falls apart, I can't walk away with nothing." "You have the military, Your Honor." "What do I have?" I nodded, standing from the table. "Thanks for the honesty. My lawyer can handle the rest." Julia didn't flinch. She only looked at me, her eyes no longer soft, just worn and cold. I left the kitchen and walked out to the back porch, gently shutting the door. No shouting, no theatrics. The storm had passed, but I knew my father's land was now being quietly bargained away, and I wasn't going to let it be traded for some shadow apartment in Louisville. 4 days before the hearing, I received a package from Henry Alden's office. Inside was a thick printout of the case file, medical reports from Dr. Monroe, bank statements, Ruth Ann Gilbert's signed affidavit, and an audio recording of my conversation with her. An independent expert had verified the voice. On top was a detailed list of evidence for court, nearly 30 items. At the bottom, Henry had written in pen, "No need to destroy her image, just strip the varnish." 2 days earlier, I had moved into the guest bedroom, claiming trouble sleeping. Julia didn't question it. Maybe she already sensed things shifting. She left early, came home late, avoided eye contact in the kitchen. In a drawer, I found the crumpled lease deposit receipt for the Louisville apartment, tucked beside empty supplement bottles. On the morning of the hearing, my mother sat in the back seat, wearing the blue dress my father gave her for their 40th anniversary. She held my hand quietly the whole drive. When I told her we were going to meet someone who would help protect the house, she just nodded. The Greenville County Courthouse stood between two moss-covered brick buildings, modest, with dignified architecture. Courtroom 3A was already lit. Julia walked in with two attorneys, meticulously dressed in a fitted cream business dress, embodying the image of a poised, overburdened wife. Judge Audrey McAllister, in her 60s, silver-haired and stern-voiced, opened the session with a brief, no-nonsense introduction. "We are here to examine the legality of the will amendment signed by Ms. Loretta Whitley. We will also assess allegations of financial mismanagement and cognitive capacity at the time of signing." Henry began by laying out a detailed timeline. Each event, document, and piece of evidence was presented with original visuals. When he played the recording of Ruth Ann, her voice echoed through the courtroom. "I didn't meet Ms. Loretta that day. Julia said she wasn't well enough. I trusted Julia." Julia inhaled sharply, glancing at her attorneys. Then came Dr. Monroe's report. It clearly stated that signs of memory loss had started at least a year before the signing. Ms. Loretta did not possess the cognitive ability to understand complex legal documents. I was called to testify. I told the entire story, from discovering the joint accounts and suspicious withdrawals to investigating the apartment in Louisville. I didn't raise my voice. I wasn't bitter. I told the truth. Each word felt like a nail into old, rotting wood. Julia was called last. She stood, smoothed her dress, and walked slowly to the witness stand. Her voice was composed as she claimed she stepped up for the family in my absence, that every decision was for Ms. Loretta's health and well-being. I wasn't there. His mother needed support. I did what was right. Henry didn't argue. He simply handed a USB to the judge. Permission to play a recording from last week, taken in the defendant's kitchen. In the recording, Julia's voice was unmistakable. "If everything falls apart, I can't walk away with nothing. You have the military, Your Honor. What do I have?" Silence fell. Julia froze, eyes glistening, but no tears. Judge McAllister leaned toward her microphone, her tone icy. The evidence is clear. The will amendment is invalid. The signer lacks sufficient cognitive capacity. The notarization process violated impartiality standards. The court orders full reinstatement of the original will, revocation of all beneficiary rights held by Julia Donovan, and a referral to the district attorney for further financial investigation. Julia never looked at me as she left the courtroom. She walked straight ahead, shoulders stiff, heels echoing down the cold marble hallway. I turned back, leaned down, and whispered to my mother, "Let's go home, Mom." She squeezed my hand. "Your father would be smiling today." That afternoon, when I returned from court, Julia's white SUV was gone from the driveway. On the front step, there was only a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the stone my mom always used to hold the door open. Inside was a single line. I had no other choice. No signature, no return address. The woman who used to sit across from me each evening, planning dinners, talking about the house and about children who never came, had left this place, as softly as a breath. I called Henry. "She's gone." "We'll file for divorce first thing in the morning," he said curtly. "She has no grounds to contest." My mother was moved into the small wooden house behind the garden, the one that used to be my father's workshop. I hired someone to renovate the space, install heating, refinish the floors, and repaint the window frames. A part-time nurse named Evelyn came by each morning to help with breakfast, medications, and health monitoring. Mom often sat by the window, staring out at the fields, clutching a faded photo album. Occasionally, she called me George, my father's name. I never corrected her. Maybe, in those moments, she was in the safest part of her memory. The main house, where I once shared a life with Julia, felt empty in ways that words couldn't explain. No trace of her perfume in the bathroom, no soft typing echoing late at night. I replaced the curtains, took down the wedding photos in the hallway, and locked the drawer of jewelry she'd left behind. I only kept one thing, the silver watch she once gave my mother, now placed on her bedside table. I didn't want to burn the past, I just didn't want it steering me anymore. 3 weeks after the trial, I received a call from the Greenville County District Attorney's Office. A criminal investigation had been opened into financial fraud, elder abuse, and notary misconduct. I turned over every record, statements, testimonies, everything. The case was escalated to the state level. I didn't follow what happened next. The attorneys would handle that. I chose to return to a part of life I had once forgotten. In the mornings, I tended the garden. In the evenings, I walked the property line, where my father had once placed small boundary stones to mark the family land. Each rock still bore faint carvings of the symbol he used since the 80s. A simple spiral, he said, stood for generational connection. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low across the grass, I could feel him standing there, arms crossed, quietly watching me pass. Elias, 37 years old, shaped by years of military discipline, once believed that loyalty and hard work were enough to protect a home, now learning to listen to the silence of old brick walls, to hold on to the things no one ever teaches you how to keep. One day, while taking Mom to a doctor's appointment, Evelyn asked me, "Do you ever regret not realizing it sooner?" I said if I had, I might have missed the chance to truly understand who I am. She nodded and said nothing more. At night, I sat on the porch steps, Max curled beside me, wind slipping through the old wood awning. No more strange footsteps in the hallway, no half-shut doors. Everything was clear now. This land doesn't belong to greed. It wasn't built through schemes or shaky signatures on forged documents. It belongs to someone who honors it, even when everything else has broken. In the breeze that rustled the old oak in the backyard, I heard my father's whisper, "Keep the land, keep the name, not just for blood, but for what must never be lost." Elias's story is a powerful reminder that blind trust can be the highest price a person pays. After years of serving his country, he never imagined the betrayal would come from the one who once shared his bed. But instead of breaking down, Elias stood his ground, defended his family's honor, and preserved the legacy his father left behind. In the real world, sometimes the enemy isn't outside, it's right within the walls you call home. Clarity and courage are essential to protect what's truly right. What do you think about Elias's actions? Was he too harsh or exactly right? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and eye-opening stories about family.